Welcome to the SundayGorilla Men's Bible Study. I'm Brother Thomas Lee Harris III, and we have entered the 8th chapter in the book of Mark in our series called Written in Red. Got my timer ready? So we're going to jump right in. Mark chapter 8, and I'm reading from the New King James Version. Verse 1. In those days, the multitude being very great, having nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion on the multitude, because they have continued with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their own houses, they will faint on the way. For some of them have come from afar. And his disciples answered him, How can one satisfy these people with the bread here in the wilderness? And he asked them, How many loaves do we have? And they said, 7. So he commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground. And he took the 7 loaves and gave thanks, broke them and gave them to the disciples, and set before them before the multitude. Verse 7. They also had a few small fish, and having blessed them, he said to set them before them also. Verse 8. So they ate and were filled, and they took up 7 large baskets of leftover fragments. And now those who had eaten were about 4,000, and he sent them away. Immediately got into a boat with his disciples and came to the region of Dalmanutha. Then the Pharisees came out and began to dispute with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven, testing him. Verse 12. But he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, Why does this generation seek a sign? Assuredly, I say to you, no sign shall be given to this generation. And he left them, and getting into the boat again, departed to the other side. And now the disciples had forgotten to take bread, and did not have more than 1 loaf with them in the boat. Then he charged them, saying, Take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. Verse 16. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, It is because we have no bread. Verse 17. But Jesus, aware of it, said to them, Why do you reason because you have no bread? Do you not perceive nor understand? Is your heart still hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? When I broke 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of fragments did you take up? They said to him, 12. Also, when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of fragments did you take up? They said 7. So he said to them, How is it that you do not understand? Then he came to Bethesda, and they brought him a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. Verse 23. So he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands on him, he asked him if he had saw anything. Verse 24. And he looked up and said, I see men like trees walking. Then he put his hands on his eyes again and made him look up. And he was restored and saw everyone clearly. Verse 26. Then he sent him to his house, saying, Neither go into the town, nor tell anyone in the town. Now Jesus and his disciples went out of the town of Caesarea Philippi, and on the roads he asked the disciples, saying to them, Who do men say that I am? So they answered, John the Baptist, but some say Elijah, and others one of the prophets. And he said to them, But who do you say that I am? Peter answered and said to him, You are the Christ. Verse 30. Then he strictly warned them that they should tell no one about. And he began to teach to them, The Son of Man must suffer many things, and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he spoke this word openly. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when Jesus had turned around and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter, saying, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men." Verse 34. When he had called the people to himself with his disciples also, he said to them, "Whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake, the gospel will save it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me, my words," verse 38, "For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and a sinful generation, of him the Son of Man also will be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." Amen. And that concludes the 8th chapter of the book of Mark. Powerful, powerful chapters and verses, starting with, again, taking a multitude and feeding them, this time with 7 loaves. And then Jesus, it's like he almost gets a disappointment from the disciples, and actually the 12, the apostles who were following him, who were still caught up in unbelief, where they did not understand this man quite yet. And then it comes to the man in Bethesda with the blind eyes, and here we see where the blessing, the process of the blessing, I'm going to call it, where he touched the man's eyes once and asked him, "Can you see?" The man said, "I see trees like men." That means he wasn't clear. And Jesus touched him again. You see that double touch. Sometimes he got to touch you twice. Sometimes he ain't got to be there and touch you at all. You see, ooh, I could preach on that. And then they continue on. And Jesus tests his disciples, asks, "Who do you say I am?" And then there's a confrontation with Peter. But he makes it clear that it is the necessity to take up our cross and follow. And once again, this goes back to chapter 7 where it says, don't get caught up in the traditions of men. And that's kind of where he rebuked Peter, right? He had to put Peter in check to keep him focused on the focus. Amen. And that concludes the 8th chapter of the book of Mark. Amen.